Hi guys, welcome to this video. In this video, we're going to be building a URL shortener using Django. So URL shortener is a platform which allows you to shorten a long URL, and then it gives you a very small URL which will redirect you to the main website. So let me show you a demo of what we're going to be building. So let's say I go to Google like this and I search for, let's say Python or something. And once I click on enter, you can see that the URL to this search result is very long. So I can just copy it like this. That's going to take from here. And then when I come here to paste it and it's shorten, you'll see that it gives me this very small URL. So once I copy this URL and open a new tab and paste it, you see that it takes me back to this Google search of Python. So that's what we're going to be building in this video. And we're also going to use Ajax to make sure that once we hit shorten, it doesn't refresh our page. That's why once we try to shorten a URL, it just automatically brings out this new URL without refreshing our page. So I'm going to use Ajax for that. And when we are done building this project, we're also going to deploy it to the web. I hope you enjoy this tutorial. Having that said, let's start with it. So guys, in this tutorial session, we're going to be building a URL shortener using Django. So the first thing we need to do, as always, is to make sure that we have Django installed. I'm just going to say pip install Django, and then this command line is going to install Django on my computer. But since I already have Django installed, it's going to tell me something like requirement already satisfied, as you can see. But for you, it should go ahead and install that. So let's just create our Django model. Say Django admin, let's say start project, and then let's name it URL shortener. So now we have created a new project named URL shortener. Let's just go into that project. So in here we're going to create a Django app. So we're going to say Django admin start app, and let's name it shortener. So this is going to start a Django app named shortener. If I press dir, I'm going to see shortener. So now that we have our project set up, we're just going to import it in Visual Studio Code. So let's come here, and then what we just need to do is to open folder, and then we're going to go into that folder. So right here is the folder, and select folder. Now it's going to open this my Django project in this code editor so we can code. So now that we have this opened, what we just need to do is to set up our project. So the first thing we need to do is to create a new folder and name it templates. Now in this template folder, what's going to be in there is the HTML pages in which we are going to be using in this project. So before I continue, I have my HTML page here, which is index.html. I'm just going to drag it into Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to put it in template. So let me say once again that I'm going to link everything we are going to use in this tutorial. I'm going to link the source code in the description below, so you can check them out to get any file you need. Now that we have these, we're just going to come into our URL shortener, go into settings.py, and then we're going to come down. The first thing we need to do is to add our app, which is shortener. Now that we've added that, we're going to come down into templates and we look for theirs, and we're just going to say base there, and we're going to say slash templates. So what this does is that it tells Django where to look for all our template file, and as you know, we saved it in our base directory in a folder called templates, which we created right here. So let me save this settings.py and close it. Now I want to do the URL mapping. If I run my project now, what you are going to see is Django default template. So we want to show our own HTML template. For us to do this, we're going to come into our app, create a new file, name it urls.py, and then we'll say from Django.urls import path, and then we're also going to say from the root import views. Now we're going to say URL patterns, should be equals to path home, we'll say views.index, and we're going to give it a name of index. So now what we just need to do is to come into views and create a new function and name it index. It's going to take a request, and then let's render our HTML page which we have in here, that is index.html. So we'll say return render request index.html. Now when we save this, it should automatically use this index.html as our home page, but not yet. That's because we only did URL mapping for our app. We also need to configure it for our main project. So we're going to come into our main project, go to urls.py. What we're going to do right here is to import include, and then we're going to create a new path, and then let's give it blank, and we're going to say include Shortner.urls, and we're going to save this. Now I can cancel this. Now let me open a new terminal and just run our project. So now a new terminal is being popped up, and what I'm just going to say is python manage.py run server. Now this command line is going to run our project on the localhost. So let's just wait for it to run our project quickly. Okay, as you guys can see, it's running on our localhost. Let's open our browser, go to our localhost, and then we should see our HTML page. As you guys can see, we have this beautiful HTML page. So now that we've taken care of everything about the template, let's dive straight into configuring the backend. So what we want to do is to create a Django model that is going to save a URL anytime a user inputs a URL and then shorten it. So let's just go ahead and do that. Let's come back to Visual Studio Code. We can close this, and then in our models.py file, let's create a new model. Let's say class, and let's say links. Okay, or let's name it URLs. I think that is better. So URL, and we'll say models.model, and then it should take two fields, which is link. So we'll say models.char field, and let's give it a max length of 10,000 because some links are very long. And then let's give it a UUID. Let's say models.character field also, and the max length of this should just be 10. Now what this is doing is that if you are very familiar with Django models, you know that it's the same thing as a database. So we're creating a database named URL, and it's going to have two tables. The first one is going to be link, and the second one is going to be UID. So link is going to take the URL which the user wants to shorten. So once the user comes here and input a URL right here and clicks on shorten, whatever that user's input should save in this link model, and then a UID should be passed to that link. That means a specific ID will be passed to that link. You guys are going to understand in a bit. So let's save this first. Let's bring back our terminal. Let me just open a new terminal here quickly, and then let's say python manage.py make migrations. And then after making migrations, we'll say python manage.py migrate. So now this is going to migrate everything into our database. So now that we have models migrated, what I like to do is to configure my admin interface so I can easily see my database. So let's just say python manage.py create super user. So now let's just use admin, and let's also use admin right here. Let's give it a password. Now it has, okay, why? And now it has created that super user. We can cancel this. If I come back here and go to /admin, okay, /admin, it's going to prompt me to log in. Now once I log in with the details in which I created now, and I say login, now you guys will see that we've logged into our admin interface. So for now, we only have two databases, which is users and groups. So if I open my user database, you're going to see the admin which we just created. But what we want to do is that under here, we should also have a new database, which should be URLs. So let's go ahead and do that. We're just going to open our admin.py and register that model. First of all, we need to import the model. Say from .models, import URL. And right here, we'll say admin.site.register. Now let's register that URL. Now once we save this and come back here and refresh, you're gonna see that that is gonna pop up right here. So let's wait for our server to load. So if we come back here and open up our terminal, okay, our server is loaded back. Now once we refresh, you guys can see that we now have a new database table which is called URLs. So now that we have this, let me go to my home page. Once a user just clicks, input a URL, clicks on shorten, it should automatically save that URL into this database. And since we're going to be using Ajax, it's not going to reload this page. Now you know that once you submit a form in HTML, it's going to take you to another page or reload that page. But we're going to use Ajax to submit this form. So once the user just input a particular URL right here, what is going to happen is once you click on shorten, without the page reloading, it's going to be saved into this database, and then it's going to return back a response with a unique ID. So let's go ahead and do that. You understand what I mean. Now we're just going to come back. We're going to come into our index.html. That is our template file. So let me cancel this terminal for now. What I want to do is to go down into this input. So right here is this. So what I'm looking for is this input, and I want to make it a form. So let me come back. So I'm going to say form, and then I'm going to close it right here. So let me just delete this. So what I was want to give this form is an ID. That's the only thing. So I'm going to say ID, and the ID should just simply be, let me say, my form or post form. Now this is good. And we're going to be using a post method. So when we're using a post method in Ajax, we're not going to configure it right here, but we're going to configure it in the script. So you're going to see that also in a bit. So let me say csrf_token and save. So this button, let me give it a type. Let me say type should be submit, so that once they click on this button, it should submit this data. And this also should have a name. Let me save it as, okay, it doesn't have a name, so we'll say name should be equals to link. So now that we have these, what we just want to do is to come down after all our HTML and create a script. Let's just close that, and then let's make sure that it has the type. We'll say text/JavaScript. So what we just want to do now, let's give it some indentation. We're going to say $, and then it's now we're going to start with configuring or submitting our form. So before we start doing this, let's come into our views.py. So once the user clicks on shorten right here, we want it to take this to a particular URL. So that URL is going to be called create. So in that URL, it's going to create that in our database and then send a response here. Let's do that quickly. So I'm going to come back right here in urls.py. Let's create a new URL and name it create. And let's say views.create. Name equals to create. Let's make sure this has a comma. Then right here in views, create request, and then let's pass for now. So now let's save this. So after doing this, since we have this URL, what we just want to do now is to come here and submit that form to this URL. So once we submit this form to that URL, then we're going to come back here and then get everything in which the user inputted and just save it into our database. So let's do that. So after saying $, I'm going to say document, and then what we want to do is on submit. So open a bracket, submit, on submit of post form, hashtag right here, hashtag post form. Now how we are getting this post form is basically this form. So what we're saying is on the submit of post form. That means once the user clicks on this submit of this form, what do we want to do? Let's give it a function. So that should be outside this, comma, function should be outside that, and let's say this like this. So now what we just want to do is to say e.prevent default. So what this e.prevent default is going to do is that once a user clicks on submit of this form, it will make sure that that page doesn't reload. So now that we have that covered, let's now use our Ajax. So we'll say $ again, .ajax, and then let's open curly braces, press enter. Then the type, which is also the method, should be post. And then URL, it should be taken to /create. So comma, and then the data in which we want to pass into it. So let's do this, and then the link, $, hashtag link dot value. So now we're going to say CSRF middleware token $, and then input. Before we say input, put this square brackets. Let's close that real quick and say name. The name should be CSRF middleware token. So that's what that does. And then after this, we should say .val to get the value. So we're also sending in a CSRF token. So after doing this, we're just going to come down here and click on comma, and then let's also give it a success function. So after doing this, okay, in here we're going to say success, and let's give it a function. So that means if everything was being submitted successfully. For now, let's leave it blank like this. So let's just leave everything blank for now, and let's come here and make sure we put our semicolon since we're working with JavaScript. So now that this success function is let me say is blank, we're going to take care of that after we submit our form. So now let's save. So since we are sending all this data into our create URL, let's go into our create URL and get those data. So right here in this views.py, we're going to go into that function. Let's remove this pass and say if request dot method is equals to post. Now if they are sending a post method, let's say URL should be equals to post dot, it should be equals to request dot post link. So we're getting what the user put as this link and storing it in a variable named URL. And then let's also use a UID. So once a user also stores that variable, once a user stores that link, we also want to assign a particular ID to that variable so that we can use that ID to generate a shortened link. And once the user goes to that shortened link, it should come back to this URL. So it's going to make sense also. Let's just import UUID to get a unique ID. So we're going to say string. We want to make sure it's in a string. So say that UUID dot UUID 4 open bracket close bracket, and then what you just want to say square brackets column 5. So we're shortening because when this generates a unique ID, it generates it very long, but we want to shorten it to only 5 strings. So let's save. Okay, we don't need to save yet. So what we need to do now is to, after we get all this data, we just want to save this data in our database. For us to do this, we need to import our models. We'll say from .models import URL. So right here now, we're just gonna say new on URL should be equals to URL dot URL open bracket close bracket, then the link should be equals to the URL, and then UUID should be equals to UID. Now once we have these, we're just going to say new URL dot save, and then once we save these, we just want to return a response. We'll say return HTTP response, but before we use that, we also need to import HTTP response. We'll say from Django.http import HTTP response right here. So we say return an HTTP response of the UID. Now we can save this. Once we go back here and test this now, it should work. Let's refresh this page. Now let's give it a URL. Let's do something like https, then let's say www.youtube.com/codewithtomi. Okay, let's say slash. Now once I click on shorten, nothing happens, but if I come right here and click on refresh, as you can see, nothing happens again. So we need to open our inspect element. Right here, we're going to come to the network. So now let's try it again. Let's click on shorten. So as you can see, we have an error, and this is what the error is. Okay, it's giving us a Django error actually. So let's just enlarge this and see. So let's go and see where the error is coming from. It's coming from right here. So request.post link. So there is an error actually right here. Let's see why that is giving us an error. So we're gonna go back and just check that. Let's come here. So right here, instead of saying URL, let's give it link, and let's say link should be equals to link, and then let's make sure everything is working perfectly. So we'll say if request the method is equals to post, then let's store a link should be request dot post link, and then UID should be string. Now that is nice. Let's save it and go try it again. Now let's close this. Let me just copy this URL I want to shorten. Now let's refresh this and paste, and then click on shorten. Now it still gives us an error. Now we're going to see what's up. Okay, I think it's not getting this link in which we are trying to give it. So let's see. Let's go down again. So it's not getting link. The problem will be from index.html. So it's not getting link. We're going to come here. So I think the ID should be link. Okay, not this. The ID should be link. Let's save it and hit refresh, and let's click on shorten. As you guys can see now, we don't have any error again. Once we come here now, preview, everything is nice. So this is the UID which we are returning as an HTTP response right here. As you can see, we return an HTTP response. That's the response it gives us. If we come here and hit refresh, we'll see that we now have a new object, the link with the UID. So let's try it again. So let's just say youtube.com, and let's click on shorten. It does another one with a UID also. Once we click on refresh and we come in here, you should see that link with that UID. So now what we just want to do is to show the user the shortened link in which we generated. So for us to do this, we're going to come right here into our index. We want to create, in this section after the form, let's have our own div tag, and in that div tag let's create like an h2 tag. So in this h2 tag is where the link should be. For now, let me put link and refresh, so we'll see how that will look. Okay, it's in this shorten. So let's just bring all this away and then put it outside here. So let's save this and see again. Okay, same thing. So let's just remove the div tag which we have. I think there's a styling attached to that div tag. Now once we refresh, it should just be a link. Okay, that means there's a styling attached to the h2. Nice. So what I just want to do is to remove this from main. Let me just remove this and put it right here. Let's save it and see. Okay, it's outside. Okay, yes. So what we just want to do now, let's try and put it here. Let's hit refresh. Nice. So we just put it in this section, and now we can see that the link is showing there. So this is where we want the link to show. Now let's just remove this link and leave it blank. So once we get an HTTP response, we want to show the link right there. If I save it and come back, you can see that it's blank. But once we shorten a URL, we want to see the link pop up here. For us to do this, we're going to come back to our script. Where we see that success function, we're going to get the HTTP response. Now, whenever we're returning an HTTP response, for us to be able to get that response using Ajax, we're going to get it as a variable named data. So I'm going to say data. Now, this data is a variable which has the HTTP response stored in it. So in here, we're just going to say $h2, and then what we just want to say is that HTML, and then let's change that to, now let me give it this. Let's just simply change that to localhost 8000 / let's add data. Now if I save this and go, you are going to see what it looks like. So let me refresh it. Let me put that same thing and shorten. Now once I shorten, you see it gives me this link, which is localhost 8000 / this UID which was assigned to this URL. So now for now, we're just using localhost / because we've not deployed our app on the web. So once we deploy our app, once we host our app we're building on the web, we're going to use a specified link. We're not going to use localhost 8000. We're going to use, let's say, link.ml / this, or just a short link. But for now, let's stick with 8000, localhost 8000. So now what we want to do is that once the user now copy these links, open a new tab and go to that link, it should take the user back to that URL in which it's shortened. That's how a URL shortener works. So for now, it's saying page not found. Let's go and do this. We're just going to come right here into URLs. I'm going to create a new URL and name it, let's leave it blank, and let's take a string. It's going to be a dynamic URL and say pk. So say views. Let's say go and go. So let's come into views, create a new function, name it go request, and let it also take pk. So now once we have this, we're just going to get pk, and then what we just want to say is URL details should be equals to URL dot object dot get, the one in which the UUID is equals to pk, and then let's just return. We want to redirect, so we need to import redirect right here. Just gonna scroll down, return redirect the user to URL details dot link. Now let's save this. Now what we're doing is that once the user goes to slash, let me come into our url.py. So this is a dynamic URL. It's gonna create something like slash, then it's gonna take a string and save it in a variable named pk. So once the user comes to slash this UID, it's gonna, this string pk is gonna be replaced, and what is gonna be there is this id. So once we now have this id, we're going to come into our views.py, get that id as pk, then we're now going to search for our model and make sure that that UID is present in our model and a link is being assigned to it, and then we're going to get that link. So I'm just going to say return redirect URL details.link. So we're just redirecting the user to that link. So let's save it and test this out. So now let's refresh. Okay, our server is not running. Let's pop it up. Okay, the problem is here. We need to put a comma. Let's save that. Reload. So now let's refresh our app. Now let's just put www.youtube.com/code with Tomi, and let's click on shorten. It gives us our URL. We copy it, paste it right here. So now you can see it says page not found, www.youtube.com. So we need to pass this as a URL. For us to do this, we'll come back here. We're gonna say https and this. And once we save it and come back, let's copy this our page again. This is our URL, and paste it. Now you'll see that it takes me to that page. You see, it takes me to https youtube.com. So now let's come back. Let's try it out with another URL. Let's say www.socialblade.com. And once I click on shorten, it gives me that URL. Let me copy it and paste it right here. Now you see it takes me to socialblade.com. That's how our URL shortener works. So now that we have created our project, what we just need to do is to host our project online. So for us to do this, we're going to use Heroku as our hosting platform. So we don't need all these. We can just quit this. What we need is two Python libraries, and they are Unicorn and Django Heroku. So for us to install these libraries, we're going to say pip. Okay, let's pip install Unicorn and Django Heroku. Now once I click on enter, it should tell me requirement already satisfied because I already have it. But for you, you should go ahead and install it. So you see it says requirement already satisfied. So now that we have this installed, what I just need to do is to come into my root directory. Let me close all this. In my root directory, I'm going to create a new file and name it runtime.txt. Now this file should contain the Python version in which you used in this project. So I use Python 3.9.1. Then we're going to save it. Another file we need to create is proc file. So this proc file is going to contain these web unicorn, then the name of your project, which is URL Shortner dot WSGI column application log hyphen again file, and like this. So we're just gonna save it, and then after doing this, what we just need to do is to pip freeze requirement.txt, pip freeze requirement.txt. So that's done. A new file here is requirement.txt. So I'm going to come into our project folder and go to settings.py, and up here, that's right here, we're going to import Django Heroku, and then we're also going to import DJ database URL, and then we're going to come here into allowed hosts and make sure that we allow all the hosts. After doing that, we're going to scroll down and we're going to come into databases, delete this, okay, delete from here, and then we're just going to say DJ database URL dot config. So after doing this, I'm going to scroll down to the end, and right at the bottom I'm going to say Django Heroku dot settings, then open bracket, in that bracket I'm going to say locals, and like this. So after saving this, we're good to go. Now we're just going to come into our command line, and what we need to do is to log into Heroku by saying Heroku login. Okay, we typed that wrong, so we'll say Heroku login. Now this is going to prompt us to open our default browser and automatically log us in to our Heroku account. So let's wait for it. It should give us a reply soon. So let's type any. So now our browser should open up. So when I click on login, logged in, if I come back, it's automatically logged me in. Now let me create a new app by saying Heroku create, and let me name it URL Shortner YT123. I'm just naming it a random name simply because I know there will be names that already have URL Shortner, because in Heroku you can't create a project with a name that has already been created before. So if I just use plain URL Shortner, it will tell me another person have taken this name. So that's why I just use that random name. So since we have this now, we're just going to say git status, git initialize, git status, nice. So git remote v, then git remote add Heroku, and then what we want to add is up here this git link. Just paste it and enter, and then let's say git remote v again, nice, and then let's say git status, nice. So what we just want to do is to create a new database, which is Heroku add-ons, create Heroku PostgreSQL obdev, and press enter. So now this should create a Postgres database with the obdev version. So database has been created. So now after doing this, I'm just going to say git add, and then it should add. So I'll say git commit. Let me say it the first time, and then I'll say git push Heroku master. So now this git push Heroku master is the final step in deploying this project. So once this is done, it should automatically deploy it onto Heroku. and then we are going to get our site URL. So let's wait for it to deploy. It should deploy within a minute, depending on how large your project is. So our project is pretty light, so it should install within seconds. So let's see. Let's just wait. Okay, installing collected packages. So what it's doing now is installing the packages which it saw in the requirement.txt files. So let's just see. After compressing, it should say done. So let's wait for it to say done. Okay, it says done, and then now let's wait for our final confirmation, and then we're just going to go to this URL, which is the URL of our project. Let's wait for our final confirmation again. Okay, that should pop. So it says verify deploy done. So let's just go to this, open link. Now you guys can see our project is ready. So what we want to do now, before we test our app, we have to come back here and migrate our database. So say Heroku run python manage.py make migrations, and then after this we're going to say Heroku run python manage.py migrate, just like how we migrate our database when we are building our project. So let's wait for this command line to run. It should actually say no changes detected, yes, but I just like doing that so that we won't get any error. So migrate now. Now this will migrate everything into our database. So let's give it a moment. It should migrate that soon. Let's see. If I didn't do this, it's going to give me an error. So I just have to do this to prevent that error. Okay, and then done. So let's come back now. Refresh. So now let's try to shorten a URL. Let's shorten this again. Now you see it gives me localhost 8000 and this link. So if I go to this URL slash this UID, it's going to take me to youtube.com/codewithtomi. But because when we were building our project, we added this localhost. So that's because we're still testing our project. Now we're supposed to add the URL of this project which we've deployed. But as you can see, we are building a URL shortener. If our URL shortener is something like this, let's say once you shorten a URL, it gives you this type of URL, then I don't think we are building a URL shortener again. So I'm going to buy a free domain. I'm going to get a free domain. There is actually a site which allows you to get a domain for free. So I'm going to get a free domain, a very short one, and I'm going to connect it to this our project. So let me show you the domain I'm going to get. Before I show you, let me test our app. Once I click on enter, you can see it takes me to youtube.com/codewithtomi. Now once I go back, now what I want to do, I want to show you the domain which I took. So you guys can see I already took this domain. It says sorry, source.ga is not available. So this is the domain I'm going to use for this project, source.ga. For now, it says source.ga is not available because I already took it. So as you can see, you can come in and claim source.cf. You can claim some domains for free. But if you want to buy the .com.net, you need to pay for them. So that's what we're going to use in this project. So I'm just going to connect it with this, my Heroku site. So when I connect it, I'll be back. So guys, right now I've already connected the domain, the custom domain which I have, to this our project. So you can see now if you go to www.source.ga, it takes you to this URL shortener. So let's test out this shortener. So let's test it out and click on shorten. Now it gives us this URL. The last thing we want to do to this project is to update this. So instead of it saying localhost 8000, we want it to say www.source.ga then /the-id. So let's go and do this. We're going to come back to our Visual Studio Code, and then in our index.html right here, instead of saying localhost 8000, let's see, I think it's better if we copy this, just come here and paste, so we don't need to put HTTP. Let's just say www.source/ga then data. So this data is the ID. So let's just save this, and then what we just want to do now is to say git add. So this, what I'm teaching you now, you are going to be able to know how to update your project even after you've already hosted it. So we already have this hosted on the web, but we want to make a change and update it. So once you make that change, to update it, you just come back to your CLI and say git add, and then you're going to say git commit -m, and let's say make it better. Nice. And then we'll just say git push Heroku master. Now this should redeploy it again with the updated changes. So let's just wait for that. It shouldn't take long this time because we've already deployed it. So let's see. Let's wait for it. It should do within a second. So let's see. Okay. Almost done. After compressing, it should say done. That means it's worked. Yes. And now we should see deploy to Heroku. So once we see this deploy to Heroku, it has deployed. But let's just wait for the last confirmation before we go check. So let's wait. It should say yes, done. So let's go back to our browser and then reload this page. So now let me shorten this URL and click on shorten. Now if I just take this link and copy it and paste it here, now you see that it takes me to that URL which I shortened. Right here you can see that I shortened youtube.com/codewithtomi. Then once I click on that, it says youtube.com/codewithtomi. So that's what this should do. So let's try it out with another website. Let's go to Google and then let me just search. Now this URL link, let me copy it and then right here let me paste and click on shorten. So now it gives me this link. So everything is working perfectly. So I hope you guys enjoyed and understood what we did in this video. If you did, please don't forget to smash that like button and please subscribe. Thank you for watching this session.